The history of the United States is marked by many moments of great societal change. The turn of the 20th century, known as the Progressive Era, was one such moment. During the Progressive Era, Americans of various different backgrounds worked to fix what they saw as the problems caused by the earlier period of rapid industrialization. Often, these people of differing backgrounds and experiences disagreed about what America's ills were and how to fix them. Moderate progressive reformers competed with revolutionary socialists, syndicalists, and anarchists to enact their vision for what America should become. While progressive reformers felt that America's institutional foundations were sound, radical reformers felt that America's political, economic, and social structures needed to be dramatically altered. As a result, radical activists took a stand against the more moderate policy suggestions of progressive reformers and proposed radical solutions to the problems which the nation faced. This forceful stand ultimately pushed moderate progressive reformers to adopt policy stances they would not have otherwise embraced. In the latter years of the 19th century, American society underwent a dramatic transformation as the nation rapidly shifted away from agrarianism and fully embraced industrialization and the changes it wrought. Immigrants flooded rapidly growing cities to take jobs in the booming, factory-based economy. There, they faced low pay, long hours, and hazardous living and working conditions. Capitalists, the owners of business, grew increasingly wealthy and powerful, both economically and politically. Society became restless, and it seemed to many that something needed to change, lest the United States descend yet again into civil war. In response to the societal ills of the era, muckraking journalists took the lead in exposing the fraud, waste, corruption, and other evils in government and business. Their work spurred social reformers to pressure government officials to enact legislation to solve society's problems. Over time, progressive reformers grew in number and in influence. While progressives changed much, they never went as far as radicals hoped. Several radical movements, such as the socialist, syndicalist, and anarchist movements, favored fundamental changes to American structures and sought to create them through either democratic or revolutionary means as an alternative to moderate reform. The Socialist Party platform of 1912 called for a radical upheaval of the American political and economic system, declaring that the capitalist system has outgrown its historical function and has become utterly incapable of meeting the problems now confronting society. Socialists called for collective ownership and democratic management of utilities, transportation and communications infrastructure, financial institutions, and natural resources. Support for socialist policies even manifested in electoral politics. In 1910, Victor Berger, a socialist, was elected to Congress. In 1911, 73 socialist mayors were elected. Additionally, 1,200 lesser officials were elected in 340 cities and towns across the nation. The press spoke of the rising tide of socialism. Another radical group, anarchists, argued that the only solution to society's ills was a revolution that would do away with the state immediately. The best known and most notorious anarchist in the U.S., Emma Goldman, denounced nearly every aspect of American society. She described her movement best when she wrote, "Anarchism stands for the liberation of the human mind from the dominion of religion and liberation of the human body from the coercion of property, liberation from the shackles and restraint of government. It stands for a social order based on the free grouping of individuals." In this, Goldman is pointing to the belief of many anarchists that corruption and oppression were so fully ingrained in American life that the only way to resolve society's ills was to completely destroy American society. This led some anarchists to adopt violent tactics to undermine order and spark revolution. Only by rebuilding from the ashes could American society truly be fixed, they believed. A third radical movement, syndicalism, challenged the fundamentals of private property directly at the workplace. The most important syndicalist organization in the United States was the Industrial Workers of the World, or the IWW. Members of the IWW argued that capital represented the accumulated theft of workers' labor and argued that the only way to end this exploitation was through the overthrow of capitalism and the seizure of productive property on the part of the workers. Members of the IWW favored strikes of all kinds in order to achieve concrete gains for workers, but also favored educating workers about the harsh realities of their situation and favored building stronger and more powerful industrial unions. These different groups of radicals believed in using varied methods to achieve far-reaching goals. While unique, They each ultimately shared the goal of fundamentally changing American society. Progressive reformers feared these radicals would destroy American social values and ideals in addition to its politics and prosperity. Echoing this attitude, Theodore Roosevelt, one of the most prominent supporters of progressive reform, proclaimed that radicalism is simply the handmaiden and forerunner of despotism and tyranny. Moderate reformers like Roosevelt and others were so troubled by the potential violence and upheaval supported by radicals that, upon realizing they could not work against them, sought to appease radicals by being more inclusive of their ideas and attempting to strike a compromise. An example of cooperation among these two groups took place during the shirtwaist makers' strike in New York City in 1909. Representatives of the International Ladies' Garment Workers Union, many of them socialists, welcomed the support of the moderate progressive reformers of the Women's Trade Union League. While very different in outlook, these radicals and reformers found common ground in seeking safer working conditions for the women in the factories. Yet this event also showed the tenuous nature of these alliances, as many moderates withdrew their support of the strike when working women demanded higher pay after shop owners offered them concessions to bring the strike to an end. As another example of radicals' impact on the reformers of the era, in 1906, a young socialist named Upton Sinclair launched an investigation into the working conditions in Chicago's meatpacking industry. The findings of his investigation were published in a novel, The Jungle, based on what he had witnessed in the meatpacking plants. Sinclair forwarded a copy to Progressive President Theodore Roosevelt. The result was a full-scale government investigation and the passage in 1906 of the Pure Food and Drug Act. While Sinclair's intention as a radical was to point out the greed and corruption embedded in the capitalist system, his efforts encouraged action that might not have been taken were it not for the radicals' prodding of progressives in a position of power. Both the events of the shirtwaist makers' strike and the meatpacking scandal provide evidence that efforts of radicals in taking a stand helped to expose the problems of industrial capitalism and led progressives to embrace reforms they would not have otherwise. The dramatic entry of the United States into World War I ushered in a wave of reactionary fervor that associated radicalism with anti-American activities. New laws designed to win the war became a basis for the persecution of those professing radical ideologies. A federal court sentenced the socialist leader Victor Berger of Milwaukee to 20 years in jail. Another court condemned Eugene Debs, the perennial socialist presidential candidate, to 10 years in jail. Federal proceedings in Chicago, Kansas City, and Sacramento sent nearly 200 members of the syndicalist IWW to jail. The outbreak of the Bolshevik Revolution exacerbated an already hostile environment towards those with radical tendencies. Fear of a global communist revolution sparked a Red Scare, where states passed peacetime sedition laws, ejected elected socialists from their seats in government, and allowed A. Mitchell Palmer's Justice Department to launch raids to arrest and deport thousands of suspected radicals in the United States. The anti-radical sentiment manifested in the election of 1920. Warren G. Harding, a conservative Republican candidate, won the presidency by running on a platform which he called a return to normalcy. The radicals of the earlier era were driven from the scene, and progressivism quickly ceased to be a force in American politics. While never gaining concrete political power, the radicals of the progressive era left a larger legacy. They showed ensuing generations that progressive radical activism is often at the root of great social change. Activists today echo those of the past when they offer radical solutions to modern societal problems. Occupy Wall Street, Fight for 15, Black Lives Matter, Bernie Sanders' presidential campaign, and the Women's March each challenge the status quo regarding economic, racial, and gender structures and seek dramatic changes to them. Like the radicals before them, the efforts of these groups and individuals in taking a stand for their radical principles have forced those in power to reckon with their demands and adopt policies they might not otherwise have adopted. Determined to make their voices heard, the radicals of the progressive era took a stand against society's ills, pushed reluctant reformers to realize the need for more wide-sweeping change, and thoroughly reshaped the role of political activism in the United States by emphasizing the effectiveness of taking a stand.